41 of the creepiest true stories as shared by people on the internet. Life is full of scary stuff, taxes, falling in love, having kids, and even sometimes just getting out of your bed might feel like a horror story unfolding. But what if we told you that all of that is all peaches and cream compared to these creepy true stories that people shared on the internet? Oh yeah, prepare yourself to be seriously spooked because these unexplained events are very real and you could be next. Just a heads up, please do not read these unbelievable stories alone at night unless you have nerves of steel and your house is totally not haunted. The best time to read these scary real stories would be in the middle of the day while you're surrounded by people, basically while you're at work, which comes with a bonus of getting to scare your coworkers too. But back to the scary stories. As you might have caught, these events truly did happen, and what's even more unnerving is that most of them involve real human beings and not some extraterrestrial entities, making them, of course, all the more believable and creepy. One of these scary stories even involves a bona fide psychopath whom you must have heard of before, if not watched one of the many movies about him. Well, we guess we did enough here to warn you about these real-life horror stories, and if you're still here, be our guest to read them all. Right now, these crazy true stories are in no particular order, so if you fancy one of them becoming the winner of the Spoof Fest, give it your vote so it'll find its way to the top of this list. After that, do whatever you wish, but do not share this article with people who are easily scared. Part 1. It was near Halloween time when my friends and I were telling ghost stories. My friend said she was going to tell a story about her parents' first date. She said she didn't like telling the story since it was actually true, but we prodded her on. To cut to the chase, the parents had spent a nice, if awkward, first date, and around the time that they would have said good night, the male in the situation, my friend's dad, suggested that they go for a midnight hike up Provo Canyon. He apparently knew the place since he had done a fair amount of rock climbing in the area. So the two drove up the mouth of the canyon, got out of their cars, and started hiking under just the light of the stars since it was a new moon. At some point, the male starts getting a bad feeling since the pathway ahead, which would pass under some trees, would be dark, and because it was getting to be quite late. He ignores the feeling and presses on. In later rehearsing of the story, the female would say that she had felt the same feeling at what was probably the same time, though she didn't know the trail as he did. A minute later, the feeling came back to the male. He ignored it again and started walking a bit of the way into the trees when his foot hit something soft in the middle of the path. Under the trees, it was too dark to see just what the soft thing was, and the feeling came back stronger than ever. Instead of finding out what his foot had bumped into, he and the female both agreed to hightail it out of there. Years later, after being married for some time, they were watching an interview with the serial killer, Ted Bundy. In response to a question asking him to describe the time that he felt the closest to being caught, he explained about the night that he lured a girl into Provo Canyon and had just killed her when he heard some people coming up the trail. He explained how he hid in the trees just in time, only to watch some guy walk right into the body and for some reason just turn around and walk away. TL, Dr. Friend's parents stumbled onto a fresh corpse left by Ted Bundy on their first date. Part 2. My mom is Native American. She named my sister Chula, which means fox. Most likely because of her name Sake, but maybe not. My sister loved everything that had to do with a fox. Last November, my mom was doing dishes at the sink and looking out the window at the woods like she always does. Well, she looks up from the dishes to the edge of the woods, and at that moment a fox steps out of the woods. It sits on its hind legs and stares right at my mom's face while she stares back through the window. She said it seemed like 5 minutes they stared at each other. Suddenly the fox got up, turned around, and slowly walked into the woods. My mom said her first thought was to call Chula, tell her about the fox. My sister never answered. She died in a head-on collision that day due to some cold drunk driver. My mom keeps looking for the fox. It has never come back. Part 3. My dad used to work in a juvenile detention center in the Miami area in the early 70s. He said there was one inmate that reminded him a lot of a young Hannibal Lecter. He wasn't strong, but he was smart and very persuasive. One day he started a riot in his block of cells just by talking the other inmates into it. My dad and another guard were sent in to check it out and try to calm things down. Everybody in the block was going crazy, banging on the bars, howling and yelling at each other. Everybody except young Hannibal Lecter. He was standing still in the middle of his cell with his arms folded, smiling and muttering the same phrase over and over quietly. My dad tried to focus on what he was saying, and after a couple seconds he understood. The inmate was reciting my dad's home phone number. I don't know how he got it. Maybe he bribed another guard into getting it for him, or he saw it written on some form on his way between rooms or something. The guy never called my dad. In fact, he never really got any strange phone calls ever. But the level of determination this inmate must have had, all just to freak my dad out, was simply impressive. Part 4. A few years ago, my brother would get a call on his cell phone around 2 to 3 a.m. every night. He would answer, and it was this hellish sounding noise, like static mixed with screams. He changed his cell number after a month of this, and it stopped. Then after a week or so it began again. The exact same noise, exact same time. Finally one day he decided to back dial the call. It was an old man that had no clue what he was talking about. Still the calls persisted. If he didn't answer, it would call a few more times. No messages were left. He decided to say screw it, ended his contract with his phone company, switched to a new one, and then got another new number. You guessed it, the screaming static calls continued after a short delay. By this time he was terrified every night, unsure why this was happening. He back-dialed the number again and got a different person. Around this time he lost his job and his phone. The calls stopped, of course. His phone was disconnected now. So one day my mom asks me to listen to this weird message she got on her home phone. It was the static screaming. We showed my brother and he was freaking out. He back-dialed the number again and it said the number was disconnected this time. Never heard from it again after that. Part 5. When I was in high school, I was babysitting for this family I had never babysat before. They kind of had an eerie house, just kind of disorganized, but with these weird masks everywhere. Anyways, there are 3 kids and it's probably about 10 o'clock. It's kind of windy outside and the power goes out. I was a little freaked out because I was really unfamiliar with the house and didn't know the kids very well. Since TV was no longer an option, I was trying to think of things to do with them. The eldest girl, Jillian, started going through my purse and pulled out my camera and was just taking pictures for about a half hour. The parents came home around 12:30 and I went home. The next morning I went through the camera to look at the pictures, and in the background there was a man looking through the glass door to the backyard. He was in every picture. Part 6. A few weeks ago my girlfriend and I were sleeping together when I woke up to her saying, "What are you doing?" She sometimes talks in her sleep, but this sounded so coherent and urgent that it jolted me awake, and I asked what she was talking about. She then woke up and said she thought she saw someone at the end of the bed. Thinking it was just a dream or semi-awake hallucination, we thought nothing of it and went back to sleep. About an hour later, I woke up and saw someone standing on the bed with the sheets wrapped up and twisted to their neck. I didn't know what to do, but the first thing that came out of my mouth was, "What are you doing?" My girlfriend then woke me up. I had been dreaming the exact same thing that she did and said the exact same thing. Part 7. So when I was a wee little lad, my mother used to rock me to sleep on a hammock because that was the quickest way to get me to fall asleep. One night while she was alone in the house with rocking me to sleep on the hammock, she was tired and accidentally fell asleep on the floor while rocking the hammock back and forth. She then had a brief dream in which she saw her elder sister, my aunt, who passed away years before I was born. My aunt supposedly walked up to her, sat down in the dream, comforting and telling my mom to go to sleep because she can take over the hammock rocking for my mom. My mom said she immediately woke me up and saw the hammock rocking back and forth on its own as if she never stopped rocking it the whole time. My mom dreams about her dead sister all the time. She just shows up and tells my mom stuff. Part 8. I was visiting family for winter break in Los Angeles. This was about 5 years ago. I was heading to the bathroom on the second floor of my aunt's house when I saw my cousin April on the stairs. April was 4 and very animated. She was busy making funny faces while sitting on the stairs. I asked her what she was doing. She said, "I'm copying the lady with the braid." I looked around, there was no one else but us. I asked, "Where's the lady, April?" She pointed to a beam running parallel to the stairwell. I asked April, "What is the lady doing?" She said, "Making funny faces." I smiled and started walking up the stairs again when April said something that stopped me in my tracks. April, her braids are around her neck. I turned back and asked April to repeat herself. April pointed, "The lady is hanging by her braid. She's making funny faces." Then April started making a face which I then realized was someone gasping for air. Part 9. When I was younger, I had an imaginary friend who lived in this massive antique dresser. We'd chill out and I vividly remember him telling me stories, although I have absolutely no recollection of what they actually were. I remember one day talking to my parents about it. Dad traveled quite a bit, so he wasn't up to date with what I was into, and when I started telling him about my dresser buddy, he wanted to know his name. It was something innocent like Peter or Patrick, but I can still see him going white in the face. I drew Peter/Patrick out for him, and the very next day he and my uncle took out that dresser and burned it. It wasn't until a few years later that I found out my dad's little brother, my uncle, also had the same friend with the same name who lived in the same antique dresser. After a few months of the typical imaginary friend sh*t, my uncle started having night terrors and couldn't sleep because of Peter/Patrick. It got so bad that they had to move him out of his room before he managed to get back to normal. Part 10. When I was in 8th grade, I went on a school trip that was called the Louisiana Tour. It was mostly going around to significant sites in South Louisiana. One of the places we went was Myrtle's Plantation, which is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. There are all kinds of stories about the place, but at one point we were standing in a room as a part of a larger group and the tour guide was talking about something. I don't remember what. As I'm standing there, I start to hear what sounds like someone hitting a piano key. After I heard it a couple of times, I started to look around for the source of the noise. I didn't see a piano, but I kept hearing it. So I asked my friends who were standing near me if they heard it. They said no. When I heard it again, I said there is it again and that they must have heard it. They thought I was crazy. So I went back to looking around the room. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide except for one woman. She caught my eye and pointed at me and then at her ear with a questioning look. I realized she was asking if I heard it too, and I nodded. At this point, the tour guide starts telling a story about a soldier who had died there and that he played the piano, and multiple guests had reported hearing him playing in the night. I honestly didn't know what to think. I guess I still don't. I talked to the woman as we were all leaving the room, and she had heard the exact same thing as me, but her husband and son had not heard it.